the way the models are being designed, so the way Anthropic and Google and OpenAI are designing models, they're making them so that if you do things that would make sense in a Word document for a human, they also will now tend to work for an LLM. So a lot of context engineering is kind of laying things out in the same way you would have if you were writing a report. Um, and that probably makes skills a lot more transferable for people who were good at that already. And if you're not good at that already, then
This is Ronan, and your company or your side business is called Trellis Research. Is that correct? Yeah. And
yes,
okay. Welcome. And can you tell us a bit about yourself, your past, and what are you most interested in when we're talking about AI and machine learning?
I'm a mechanical engineer originally. That's what I studied in Ireland and also at MIT. My last startup had nothing to do with machine learning. It was a process engineering business using membranes to do specialty separations in the food and beverage industry. So I spent about 6 years in that startup after selling it. I sold it in about 2020. And after that, I decided I wanted to learn more about software. I had used software for running hardware experiments, things like MATLAB. But when ChatGPT came along, it became a lot easier to code. And I started watching YouTube videos. I know you were around back then. Your
Yeah.
channel's been going a lot longer than most people like me. And I learned a lot and saw people putting out collab notebooks. That was a particularly useful tool. And I found that for me, learning it was very helpful to produce content. And that's how I started doing YouTube. And it kind of grew from there. And I turned it into making more elaborate repositories, repos, GitHub repos that people could use to learn. So that's kind of what takes me from hardware to software today. Yeah, I suppose to answer your question on what am I most interested in machine learning, right now I spend about 80% of my time working on the ARC prize. I've decided to work on it this year with Lewis Hammonds, and we've been really focused on that. It's going to be a deadline of November 3rd, so pretty busy till then, but trying to still make some content on YouTube and make some tutorials.
Oh, great. I didn't know actually about the ARC price. So, how is the progress going? Can you share some of the details around that?
Sure. Yeah. I suppose on the challenging side, we're still only scoring down in the low single digits, around 1 to 2%. So we still have a lot of work to go. There are 2 months left. We're taking a Python approach, so we're trying to write Python programs that can solve. If you don't know what we're talking about and you're watching this stream, by the way, you can go to arcprize.org, arcprize.org, and you can check out some examples to see the kinds of challenges that I'm trying to work on. But yeah, I suppose on the positive side, there's been a lot of news over the last 2 days about some approaches that have taken the lead in the public leaderboard, not in the private competition, but where you can use pretty much any amount of compute. There are two guys who've used Grok 4 in a loop kind of, and they're getting now 20, I think 9%, whereas previously the top score was about 15% on the public leaderboard. And their approach is also based on writing programs, some Python, some natural language programs. So I think that gives us a bit of hope that we're kind of on the right track.
Okay, that sounds great. Probably you're going to do an update on your channel when the challenge is complete. And are you going to, let's say, open source some of the work after the challenge is complete?
Yeah, I think we will open source it. I know it can be hard for people who win because they feel, well, maybe if we open source, we won't have a lead next year, but it kind of changes so much year on year. I'm not sure there's a huge benefit. And I think for Lewis and I, anyway, part of it is just seeing if we can contribute. So we'll be happy to open source. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So you talked about the, let's say, the sudden jump from hardware to software. How would you recommend somebody that is new to the AI machine learning with, let's say, some background in software engineering? How would you recommend for somebody like that to get started with the field, and which are the sub areas that you find most practical in the real world?
I would say start off with the private models, like OpenAI is probably a good place to start with their API documentation, trying to find some YouTube videos of using OpenAI APIs for first of all first of all, just chat completions, but then maybe doing some tool calling, and then maybe trying to do some basic agents, try to build a simple agent. So once you're done then with the private APIs, I think about then moving into your own language models. And I would recommend starting with YouTube videos that go through Colab notebooks, or Jupyter notebooks, because they just are very visual and you can see step by step what's happening. And you can then start to download your own model and maybe train the model, push it back up to Hugging Face. Try to work with Hugging Face is another recommendation. So I would start with private, then move to the open source LLMs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So great. This is very similar to what I'm recommending to most people. And you touched about the private versus the open models. Like, what is your, let's say, the overall opinion there? How do you see the open models catching up with the closed ones? And where do you think this race is going to lead us?
I don't know where it's going to lead us, but certainly for a majority of applications, everybody will say this, and I think it's correct. The private models are the way to go. When you can serve a model for very many people, you're able to serve it at much lower cost because you can run at large batch size, which is ultimately what drives the economics. And so the economics are going to be far better. There are some great private models out there. Gemini Flash is a very good model if you're looking to use AI in your business. It's extremely fast. It's faster than Sonnet. It's faster than the OpenAI models, and it's very performant. Of course, Anthropic's Claude Sonnet is a very good model as well. It's a bit more expensive than Flash, a little bit slower. And then GPT-5 now has the mini and the nano versions. The nano version is pretty good price. Actually, the GPT-5 mini model is not all that cheap. It's kind of up there in a class with Sonnet right now. So it can build up in cost. And also because it's reasoning, it can be quite slow. But yeah, I'd recommend starting off. I think the Gemini model is a good model, probably still underappreciated just for value when you're doing developer work. And I think those will always be a lot cheaper than rolling your own model. Now, in my YouTube channel, the people who watch it, they are there because they have a reason often that they want to roll their own model. Sometimes the reason is they just want to learn, and it is a good way to learn. If you want to know how AI works, rolling your own model, even if it doesn't make business sense, is still a good way to learn because you're forced to figure out what the tokenizer is doing. You're forced to figure out how to lay out the prompt template. These things are all going to be useful educationally. But then you do have people, they have specific data sets. That's usually why people are rolling their own. They have some data, and usually, often it's not even text data, it's audio data, it's visual data. And here you can have cases where the models are just not going to perform on that domain, at least the private models, if they're not familiar with those data subsets.
Yeah. So I'm very well aligned with the fact that Gemini 2.5 Flash in particular is a very strong model, very fast, very cheap, and it works quite well on the multimodalities with both text, audio, and text and images or PDF files, etc. And from what I'm seeing within the open router statistics, for example, the models are jumping up the ranks with their usage. And in business use cases, especially when working with large documents or more text, you can see that these models are quite performant, and they are very well tunable with the prompts, not in general with fine tuning, but just prompting them. It seems like that, at least in my opinion, the models from 2.0 to 2.5 has jumped quite a lot. I haven't seen the same thing within the GPT-5. And you mentioned that the GPT-5 mini is actually quite expensive compared to the Gemini 2.5 Flash. So I would completely agree with that. So you mentioned fine tuning as well. And in general, those models do require quite a lot of data, like at least 1,000, 10,000, or even more examples if we're talking about text or other modalities. And in your experience, have you seen people that are actually fine tuning those models and implementing them within their business use cases, or is it just a practical exercise for you to understand how these models work under the hood?
I do see customers doing it for business use. Some clear examples are around audio, for example. Audio models still are challenged by things like turn detection and recognizing the end of a pattern of speech. And if you have data, particularly data that represents the turn patterns, so the types of conversations that you want, then you can improve the turn detection by, say, training the voice activity detection or training the model itself. Often it might be a speech to text model, so Whisper or some better version like Foxtrot, for example. The other one is images. People that are doing detection within, say, factories of safety incidents or certain objects. This is going to be amenable to doing fine tuning. And then the other case I have seen with text is around structure generation. I see it with documents. If you have, say, a set of health documents and you need to extract information and you need to parse it into JSON so that it can be used to fill forms, you can get improvements in performance through fine tuning in those cases there, particularly where the models aren't too familiar. And the other case is maybe you don't want to use a reasoning model like GPT-5 Mini. And so if you want to save on cost and you want to save on speed, then it can make sense to tune a model that's familiar with your data and is going to be faster. There's companies that are kind of based just on that, like OpenPipe, who actually I think just got acquired by, I can't remember if it was Anthropic or somebody else, but yeah, they just got acquired. There've been a few acquisitions. There was also one of Human Loop by Anthropic. I'm not sure if who OpenPipe was. Oh, I think it might have been CoreWeave. Yeah, because CoreWeave acquired Weights and Biases, and yeah, I believe they've acquired OpenPipe. But OpenPipe allows you to train your model very fast, and then just inference a much smaller model like a 7B instead of inferencing a larger one. So yeah, structured responses in particular, I think, are amenable to fine tuning because you can just get the LLM used to giving that exact response pattern back.
Yeah, and again, even Google with their latest Gemini models, they allow you to fine tune them. And from what I've seen, they also allow you to get the same, let's say, relatively same inference speed and cost per token. So it seems like it is a no-brainer if you want to squeeze some more performance, if you have more data available. Not to be just advertisement for Gemini models, but it looks like that they are, let's say, on the right track there.
Well, I was just going to add, I do think OpenRouter is a useful tool for people that are building, because initially I didn't get it. I was like, why does OpenRouter charge, basically 5% when I could just do this myself with Light LLM or something like that? Light LLM is a library that allows you to connect to different API endpoints. But with Light LLM, you have to put an API key in for the different API endpoints. And it turns out this is very useful if you can have one API key that can go to multiple endpoints, and that's what OpenRouter does. And it's also, I think, useful because it prevents your business getting locked into one LLM provider, because it forces you to write everything with an OpenAI client and just hit OpenRouter. And now if you need to swap model because there's a better GPT-6 out, you can just move from Anthropic. Whereas I think if you build your whole engineering stack around Claude, then you're going to be stuck with Claude even when something better comes out. Now there is nuance because the wrappers are never perfect. OpenRouter's wrapper still has some, it's not completely uniform across all providers. So you need to look at a few little tweaks. But anyway, just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, especially when you're passing in modalities or thinking budgets, etc. Some of the APIs are slightly different.
Thinking budgets are a pain.
Yeah, actually, today a colleague of mine has shared a GitHub issue with where the thinking budgets are not necessarily respected when we are setting max output tokens for the Gemini APIs. So just a side note that you should probably need to do some testing before putting everything in production. Okay, so you mentioned GPT-6, like when a new model comes around from one of the larger labs, what is your process of testing it and evaluating it for your own personal use, or maybe later recommending it to other people? How do you go through this process yourself?
I don't know if I can do it quickly. I think it takes quite a bit of time. And what that means is using the model within some tool. Usually for me, it's going to be a code tool like Cursor. And probably it's going to take a few days to see. Now, maybe there's some models like I remember maybe there were certain points in time with Cursor where I would quickly try, say, GPT 4.1, and then I would realize, yeah, no, I'm just going to go back to Claude Sonnet here because I noticed that I'm just broadly getting good performance, but it's not very well measured. In terms of, yeah, the measurement, yeah, I don't even know. I just go on vibes based on the blogs that I read. So I'll read a few different discussions. There's this guy, I think Moshevich. He sends out a ton of blogs like pretty much every day or every second day. There's no way I can read them all, but he does a very good job when there's a new model that comes out. He finds all the tweets that are relevant. And if I review the tweets, that usually gives me a good sense of, okay, this model is going to be good. Um, Otherwise, like things matter like price and like speed. So I actually don't use Grok 4. Maybe I should use Grok 4 more. Why don't I use it? I have the impression it's kind of expensive, but I'm not even sure that's accurate because I think it's maybe not that expensive. It's more expensive than Claude Sonnet for sure. Yeah, so I guess I'm just saying I'm inefficient.
Actually, I would argue that you might be quite efficient because, of course, when a new model comes out, there is a lot of hype, a lot of YouTubers, which are part of the problem as well. This is the next great thing. Everything is changed now, whatever. And when you have some time to work with the model for a while, then you can essentially say, okay, this is a good or a better model according to my vibe checks, whatever that means. But
Yeah.
I do completely agree with you that it takes time and it shouldn't be rushed, especially if you're putting something new to production.
Maybe two things I think, aside from model choice, I think there's two things that have really made a difference. One is putting all of the context, putting all of the code into the context, like Claude Code does. I think this is very big. It makes a very big difference to the performance. And I think it's a big strategic disadvantage to Cursor that they did not do that. I think they're doing it a bit more now. But not putting the full code in context, I think, is a big disadvantage. And it's a big advantage and reason why now I pretty much use Claude Code all the time. I might move in another month, but yeah. And then the second thing is Claude models in particular don't reason that much. And because they don't reason that much, it feels better because it's fast. And I think that's also a significant advantage over using something like GPT-5 Mini. I just sense with Claude that my response is better. Now, maybe that's wrong because it changes so fast, but that's my experience. And I think that's why Claude Code is doing well.
Yeah. So
and by the way, Cursor have released a CLI. So they've released a, you can operate in terminal too, which is clearly a response to Claude Code. But,
yeah. I haven't tried that one. So I was going to talk to you about the AI coding setup. Like in general, what is your opinion on AI coding or AI assisted coding? Like how do you incorporate that within somebody who is an ML or AI engineer? And which are the tools you mentioned, Quad Code or Cursor, etc.?
Yeah, if I graph my level of AI coding, the amount I use it, it looks like this. It's like going up, and then going down again. So over the last month or two, I've reduced the amount that I rely on the assistant because I've realized it's actually slowing me down because when I don't understand something, I'm spending more time getting out of a problem. And so I'm back to a point where I still use it heavily, but I use it now much more incrementally and also trying to write tests and trying to understand and review the diffs more. So I find I've actually gone backwards in the last 2 months and I'm using my head more. I use Claude Code right now for the reasons I described. I think because it's all in context. It's so annoying when you have to wait for the context to compress. But apart from that, I think the quality is very good. I actually use it on one screen or on the side of my screen, and then I look at my code in Cursor, which I now don't pay my subscription for anymore. So I guess I'm using it like VS Code. I think that's useful though, because it Claude does show you the diffs, but you're still missing parts. So I feel you need to look at the diffs within VS Code, and then you can decide whether you accept or not. I also think having good repo hygiene, and this is something Lewis has probably taught me as we've built out our ArcPrize project, using UV instead of pip for install, using a TOML file so that there's a description of the packages that are installed. And here I'm talking about Python, of course, because a lot of my work is Python. So I've got a TOML file with all of my packages. I try and have that in the root. I try and have a folder called experimental where I write all of my quick rubbish tests so that they don't accumulate all over the repo. And I try keep that separate. Yeah, I mean, UV will set up the environment, the virtual environment. That also is useful on GPUs to have the same consistent environment. And then having a folder for tests. I mean, this is basic stuff, but having a test folder and then having PyTest and running UV run PyTest in root and telling Claude Code after it makes the change, do you need to run any tests? And then run UV run PyTest in root and just check that it all passes. So good hygiene like that is helpful, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So great. We're back to good hygiene within the dev environments, etc. Even though we're going with the AI coding, etc. Yeah, this is something that I think that a lot of people that I'm talking to are even going to back to. What I mean is that you talked about going back from a bit from the AI coding in particular, going back to some manual work and doing a bit of let's say proper engineering, especially if you're working with those AI coding agents within larger projects. And in my opinion, they have changed completely the way that you can write code, but also they have completely changed the way that you can turn off your head, if you will, and don't think about anything, then push something into PR or branch or whatever, and then get a lot of mess along with that code. So yeah, you should still be pretty careful with that. Yeah, and it looks like that the IDE experience is not going away. We are probably from the older generation that we are probably stuck with that. I'm not really sure about the newer developers, etc. But at least for us, this seems to be the case. Okay, so you talked a bit about the coding hygiene with the editors, etc. Like, in your opinion, which techniques are becoming standard? For example, prompting techniques, doing context work like contextual engineering, etc. RAG applications, for example, agentic workforce, etc. Which of those, let's say, buzzwords are becoming more mainstream and more useful in practice, in your opinion?
The way the models are being designed, so the way Anthropic and Google and OpenAI are designing models, they're making them so that if you do things that would make sense in a Word document for a human, they also will now tend to work for an LLM. So a lot of context engineering is kind of laying things out in the same way you would have if you were writing a report. And that probably makes skills a lot more transferable for people who were good at that already. And if you're not good at that already, then probably, being tidy with how you provide information is still going to help. I'm not really sure that, I'm not really sure that will change. Providing the right context is always, if you provide it in a mess or you don't provide the right context, it's hard to see how a language model could do well. So I suspect the context engineering, if you want to use that as a new word for writing well-organized documents or organizing well-organized portfolios, I think is here to stay. I think a lot of the work remains on benchmarking. Benchmarking is key for any engineer trying to develop evaluation metrics. I know everybody says it, but what is it that tells you that this is good or not? And it's hard to get away from just manually writing a few examples. It's also hard to motivate yourself to do it, but in terms of quality, it's hard to get away from just sitting down, writing down 20 good examples or using an LLM to help you and using that to just gauge whether your system is working well or not. And that applies as well for choosing which language model to use, which is a big part, I think, of an engineer's work now, because they're improving. So if you don't have a good way to decide which LLM to use, then you're probably going to be falling out behind. So you need to have a good way to answer that question you asked me earlier. And yeah, I even say when clients come to me and they say, I want to fine tune this new model, the first thing I say is, well, which are the 5 best private models you think are going to do this? Maybe it's not as good as you want, but what are the 5 best? And run those models and come back with the results, because then we can start to think about improving upon that. Now we know what we need to improve upon. And by the way, you should run also some of the open source models, like via OpenRouter or some other way, so that you know which model we actually might fine tune, because it probably makes sense to start with a model that's already doing well. So yeah, a few thoughts.
Yeah. So great. On top of that, probably the thing with the knowledge cutoff isn't going to be, let's say, solved anytime soon. So probably doing, as you have already talked about, the context engineering part is going to be pretty important, because even if you're using those models just for agentic coding, it looks like when a new library comes around with new APIs, etc., you still need a way to describe the changes to the LLMs. And the more succinctly you do it with less tokens, and probably using a lot more information dense tokens, if you will, the better your results are going to be. I have just wanted to ask you about the context window debate. Like, are you seeing improvements there? Because a lot of people are, of course, saying, okay, 1 million parameters, 1 million tokens, 2 million, 10 million, etc., etc. And I'm seeing that, at least in my opinion, most of those models are relatively okay up to 100K, 200K, if that's a bit about pushing the limits. And after that, they are clearly exhibiting catastrophic forgetting, etc. What is your opinion on this issue, if you will?
I think it's still an issue. And if you look at, I just mentioned there are two guys who've got a Python or language writing approach to Arc. One of the recommendations there is actually not to look at all of the examples at once in the LLM, but only to take like a pair at a time. And the reason is because the shorter context gives you better accuracy. So this is still a thing where shorter context gives you better accuracy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you should leave out content. Probably if the content needs to be there, it's better to have a long context than to have a short context with stuff missing. So that's going to still be better. But all else equal, if you can make it short, it's going to be better on reasoning. And I suppose the reason is because it's a quadratic relationship. As you increase the length, this token needs to refer back to every single prior token. So you're just adding on more pairwise interactions, and that's just adding noise ultimately as you make your sequence longer and longer. And we don't really have a way to filter out that noise, which would mean better figuring out which parts to attend to or not. This is kind of a key thing related to memory, which humans are able to do. We are able to intentionally forget stuff that's not important, but that is very non-obvious how to implement within some kind of machine learning. And it's also related to what you mentioned, the fact that there are cutoff dates. It's not easy to take a cutoff date and just extend it. Yeah. You actually generally retrain the model. So this remains a problem. And then back to your earlier point on what are the tools developers are using now. In principle, memory is probably a tool that would be nice to use. I'm not sure we have a canonical way of using memory yet. There are different ideas about putting it in a database or putting it in a window within your context. But memory is an area that clearly would help performance, and we probably don't know yet how to do it. There's a company called Letta, Letta, that's working specifically on memory. Yeah, you might want to take a look at a few of their things. But of course, ChatGPT is trying to incorporate memory, and people will appreciate it's not perfect. Like when you start a new chat, it definitely doesn't have memorized the stuff you need always. So that would be a good developer tool, but it's not straightforward to do right now.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many people have come to ask me, can we just add the information for like additional 2 or 3 months of data and slap it on the LOM and keep the performance or even increase it of the model? And like in those cases, you still need to explain why this is not like so feasible as they might think about that. Okay, so you mentioned some developments that you want to see. Like looking at the larger companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, even XAI, etc. Are you seeing a clear winner within those companies, or are we going to get more fragmented LMs that are good at some things from different companies? And ultimately, you should still need to choose your tools when you're working on specific tasks. I mean, like, what do you think within the not so distant future, 6 months, 1 year, something like that?
I think it's really hard to say. I think the field is very dynamic still. Anthropic has advanced a lot with Claude over the last 12 to 18 months. About 18 months ago, we weren't all talking about everyone using Claude or Claude Code, but I think that could change again. Somebody else like OpenAI, for example, their Codex product I find incredibly difficult to use. I really dislike that it has to spin up the environment, which takes time, and then I can't do anything until it's done, and then I have to go back and read it, and I ask a question, and when you ask a question, it's got to spin up the environment again. It's kind of crazy. But like, it's not like that's not fixable. They are smart, and they are going to probably fix that and come out with some better coding product. So that's potentially going to change the landscape. The other thing to keep in mind is the big idea here was data and compute. Let's add data and compute, and this does really well. And that wasn't obvious in 2017, but it's obvious now. And a lot of these companies are largely they are earning a return from that bet, from continuing that bet, which makes sense. But that's very different than inventing something new. I think it's to OpenAI's credit that they did start the reasoning phase, because that was a somewhat different direction. But I would expect if you're asking the question of where is progress, progress is probably not what we're seeing here. And it's also probably not predictable. Like real progress is probably going to be something quite unexpected that would be just difficult to describe right now.
Yeah. Man, with that talk, we aren't going to get any sponsors because we're just saying everything is bad. But yeah. Okay. So yeah, I really think that it looks like that we got, let's say, to some sort of a plateau at the moment, but at any time we can make a large jump due to unknown progress within the field.
I wouldn't be negative. I think they're doing really good work. I think OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, I think they're doing really good work. I'm not really criticizing it. I'm just describing the nature of progress. And there's a lot of room to go in terms of product and making the like just I what I described about Codex, that is not a scientific thing they need to fix.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of product improvements that they are making, I think. I think that's very good. And they deserve credit for the directions like the reasoning, or I think Anthropic deserves credit for really aligning itself with the developers around, like I said, not thinking for too long, having the client for code, having MCP, things like this. But if the question is more the scientific progress, then my default answer, not just about this industry, is scientific progress is it's less consolidated. It's going to come from somewhere random. It's going to come probably from smaller groups. We don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, if more people want to find about you and your work that you're doing, would you share your details? So, I'm going to put everything within the description of this video as well.
Yeah, the YouTube channel Trellis Research. That's TRELIS. It's a misspelling of the word trellis with two L's, which is kind of a like some kind of a structure or framework. That was the original thinking for it. But I couldn't buy trellis.com, so I bought Trellis with one L. You can go to trelis.com. I do have a website, but it will make more sense if you've watched the YouTube videos first, because it's a description of the different tools and products. So yeah, I think like with you, YouTube is the right entry point for, and the playlists. I find the playlists are helpful for people. So find the playlists on the channel.
Okay, so I'll link everything together. Okay, so would you like to discuss anything else? Do you want to say anything else?
What else do I want to say? Take a look at ARC price if you haven't already. I think that kind of, it's a bit different than the usual direction of scaling, and it is designed to encourage people to think about new approaches in machine learning. Many of us still take the old approaches. I mean, that's still allowed, but take a look at arcprice.org. I think it's a fun competition, and you can find a lot of YouTube content on MLST, Machine Learning Street Talk, is a channel that covers a lot of ArcPrice.
Okay, great. I will post a link to that as well. Okay, so thank you for coming up. This was the first episode in the series. I already have a second guest for the second part, but the first part is only one, I would say.